Welcome to Levels of Connection, where we discuss how human connections work and why they're so important. Welcome to Levels of Connection. I'm Stefanos Papadopoulos, and my guest today is David Watson. David is an executive at THINKQSHIFT, where he is the relationship activator and optimist. At THINKQSHIFT, they craft fabulous leaders to succeed and reinvent the world. David has a really interesting way of describing how he connects, and he emphasizes the value of genuine and transparent relations. Take a look and find out more. Welcome to Levels of Connection, David Watson. Welcome here.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to see you.
Great to see you. It's a real pleasure to see you again. To introduce you to our viewers, David Watson is a leader, and he's an executive at THINKQSHIFT, where you help companies and executives and leaders and help the current and the next generation of leaders. Welcome, David. Tell us a little bit more about what you do, and then we can dive into connecting.
Yeah, well, like you said, like we deal a lot with the leaders of organizations, but even if we're talking about levels of connection, right? You make a bunch of connections inside these organizations, help different lines of businesses. Obviously, it makes sense to work with the CEO and the executive leadership team, but every line of business has different challenges that they face, and so we try to work with the organizations, whether it's through coaching or leadership development programs or facilitation exercises that will take people through. It's kind of a blend of all of that. So we call it leadership services. So, at any one given moment, it could be advisory, consulting, mentoring, coaching, training. But at the end of the day, as the title of your program says, it's about making connections with people. So love to talk more about connections. So thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. And you're also an author. And here's your book, and it's called Lessons Learned from My Sons. Thank you for bringing this into the world. It was a pleasure reading it, and surprisingly enough, one of my favorite sections was around connecting.
There you go.
Tell me more about that. It was a fantastic lesson and section to go through the book. Talk to us a little bit more about that.
Well, I'll start by channeling my inner math geek. I like page 70 is the story of connection. I have it open in the book here. And so here's how I start. So the definition of connection: a relationship in which a person, thing, or idea is linked or associated with something else. So the story talks mostly about people connections. It could be things, ideas, other things, but here's how I start off, and see if you could follow this. 2 equals 1, 3 equals 3, 4 equals 6, 5 equals 10, 6 equals 15, 7 equals 21, 8 equals 28, 9 equals 36, and 10 equals 45. Like, what the heck does that mean? So there's in a formula, and the formula is n times, in parentheses, n minus 1 divided by 2 equals the number of connections. So as an example, going to the 5, if there were 5 of us, there's 10 unique connections among 5 of us. But if there's 10 people, there's actually 45 unique connections. So the idea about connections, it's kind of this exponential curve. As you make more connections, you and I have connected, and then you and I have connected other people with people. And so now those connections have bred more connections and more connections. So it's fabulous just the way that it works. So I love that you're building this podcast and this whole thing and concept around levels of connection, because I also find it fascinating. It's awesome.
Isn't it amazing how the value just multiplies and it's just, there's no boundaries to it, no geographical boundaries, no time boundaries. It's like, I mean, we met like 3-4 years ago, and the connection that we built and the other people that we brought together through our connection, I can hardly follow now how many
Right.
people we've touched throughout the globe from our friendship and from our connection.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's been fabulous. And I won't go through the whole story, but one of the things that I always it just touches my heart is I talk about, I live in Seattle, Washington now, but I grew up in the Chicago area in Illinois. And since I've been out here 30 years, I love to go back, and I bring a lot of friends from Seattle. And the story is I take Seattle friends back to Chicago, and they meet my friends.
You have a name for it. I love the name. Tell us the
Yeah,
name.
Friends of Waddy,
There
FOW
you
is
go.
what it's called. In fact, there's a brick on Wrigley Field. In fact, I have it right over there that's called Friends of Waddy. Anyway, but the cool thing is I've been doing this for so long. I now have like friends of mine from Seattle that I worked with back in Chicago or I went to school with. They now are connected, and I'm not even part of it sometimes. Like they're talking and connecting and doing things outside, and I was the one that originally brought them together. And so I love that kind of idea of connections. You know, I still want to be involved because I'm like, hey, I have a little FOMO and I want to hang out with them too. But I love when I get all these different people together and they all just have a blast and they don't even need me around, which is fantastic. So I just love how, as we're talking about, just like you and me, like we were brought together through other people that we don't even need to talk to them anymore, that you and I are friends. So it's awesome.
And it's like an amazing positive snowball effect, which just takes a life of its own, and the energy just keeps spreading, and I can feel the global effect of this. I love the Friends of Wadi. Tell me a little bit about when you were a kid. How were you when you were a kid connecting?
Well, you know what? That's funny. I think I talk about it in the book in a different story, but um, I always tried to figure out the evolution, and I think here's where I go with it: is that both of my parents were single children. They both had a parent that passed away when they were young, and so I literally have no aunts, uncles, cousins. So to me, family is my mom, my dad, and my brother. And, you know, great family, love all that. But I think early on, because I wanted to be extroverted and be around other people,
Mm-hmm.
it just drove my desire to connect with people. Because it wasn't like I could go to a family reunion, there's 100 people related to me. I go to a family reunion and I met my table for dinner with four of us. So I think like early on it was just, you know, drove me. And then we moved a couple times when I was younger. And so I was the kid that would like walk around the neighborhood, knock on doors and find other kids and let's play and let's do stuff. And I mean, I think I started it probably about the time I was able to walk. Maybe it took a little longer before my parents let me walk around a neighborhood. But yeah, it started when I was young.
So you were the organizer and the initiator of all that, and your title is also, you're the activator.
Yeah, relationship activator. That is my title within ThinkShift because that is, and in fact, one of the other stories I talk about in my book is my values, and literally my number one value is a mix. It's relationships, friendships. So it's anything related to connecting with other people.
There you go. Do you have a system around connecting or a process?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wouldn't say I have a process. I'm not really a process guy in that sense. To me, it's the other and as we were talking before we started this, like my title couldn't fit. It actually
Mm,
says relationship activist and optimist. So that's another one of my values is being optimistic. So the way I always approach a relationship is with optimism and say, hey, there's always going to be a win here. There's always something positive that I can get about it more than anything, I tend, there's the idea of trust but verify. I kind of go into a relationship and say, this is going to be a great relationship and let's explore it and then see. And, I guess if anything, I'd say I'm a big fan of the win-win and
mm.
make sure that a relationship is beneficial to you, beneficial to me. And then let's see where it goes. And, I'm good with ambiguity. And so I'd rather step in and try to have a relationship than not. So more than anything, it's just be approachable, be open, be friendly, learn, listen, help, understand what the other person's about and then see what's in it for both of us and figure it out. So maybe that is
I
a
love
process.
that.
I don't think I've codified it specifically, but kind of have a bunch of moving parts there.
Can you think of a relationship that you have today that initiated in a completely random way, a connection relationship that was initiated in a completely random way years ago without even thinking about it?
Oh yeah, like I go. it'd be the story of my best friend here in Seattle, Mark. He, it just happened. I was walking up the street and found a playground because I like to play basketball, and started playing basketball. And he was literally at the other hoop on the other side, and we're like, "Hey, you want to shoot?" And this is right when I had moved to Seattle, so I'm in my mid-20s, and you know just started playing basketball, and we're like, "Hey, cool, let's do this." And then we start talking, and then hey, I'll be up here next week. See you next week. And then I'll be up here the next week. Okay, great. Hey, let's grab a beer. And then we'd have a beer, and then we started talking. And then he's like, "Hey, I'm going to start a league." And then it just grew from there. And we ended up doing things where ultimately he and his wife ended up being literally in my will, and they were going to take
Wow.
care of my sons if my wife and I had died. So like literally he and his wife were going to move into our house and raise our children. Like it became that tight of a friendship, but it started with a total random, "Hey, I just feel like playing basketball today," and I run into some dude. So
And
it's
you could have just thrown some hoops on your own and left, but you didn't.
yeah,
You initiated the contact.
yeah, for sure. It was fun. And he was, he was similar, right? He definitely was more of the, okay, we're not going to be these two guys that are shooting baskets alone on either side. But we didn't go into it thinking this could be one of my best friends
Yeah.
in the world. It just was like, hey, let's just start
Yeah.
hanging out, having a little fun playing basketball, and see where it goes.
And how about like a contact or a connection that was very sort of specific, that you knew somebody, or you saw somebody and you wanted to meet them or create a connection with them, and you did it in a more systemic manner, a more specific, on purpose manner?
Yeah, I mean that I would say that is a little bit more about the business side of it. Like when
Okay.
I know, for example, when I'm responsible, like when I in my earlier years in technology, when I was, working in sales or had responsibility for certain clients, it's like, hey, here's an executive I need to eventually build a relationship with. And it was partially, purely out of a business sense to start. And then what I found over time is I got to be friends with them. And I even go back, like one of my very first bosses at IBM said, "Hey, be careful, because if you get to be friends with the people you do business with, it might make it hard for you to ask the tough questions like, are you going to sign the deal?" And I actually have found it to be the opposite. It's
I was
actually
going to say, what do you think about that?
yeah, it's the opposite. I don't have
Yeah.
that problem at all. Like we could just be upfront and say, "Hey, let's," because at the end of the day, you're trying to make something into a win-win, and
Mm.
my job is to help that other person be successful, and they see me genuinely trying, and then it just becomes natural. So I do have, I would say, quite a few friendships that started from a very intentional, I need to build a relationship with this person from a work perspective, that
Mhm.
now we're friends outside of work and still stay in touch with each other. In fact, there's a couple stories about those people in the book too.
And how do you make that transition? Is it, talk to me a little bit more about that.
I don't know that it was a transition. It's a natural evolution to me. Like
Mm.
I don't get caught up in the first part of it. Like, I mean, think about just how you and I have evolved. Like, I don't feel like there was a transition point. It just, every time you and I talk, it feels like we discover something new about each other, and it just keeps growing like that. And certainly there probably was some inflection point, because as the first couple times we're talking, it's like, okay, I got to learn you, you got to learn me, but we're both
Mm.
interested. And certainly at one point, it's like, hey, I trust this guy trusts me. It's awesome. And I think there is a probably hump that you get over, but I don't know that I mentally think about it. Like, it just at some point it's like, oh, this is totally comfortable. And I think it just works that way. And there's certainly, I mean, if I went back to it, like going back to some of those business relationships, um, there's certain some point where it went to be more than business. And it's like, hey, at one point you had lunch with someone, and he started talking about personal stuff, and we went there,
Mm.
right? Whereas the 7 discussions before were 100% business. So I'm certain I could track it, but that's probably what the inflection point is when you start to mix the personal side and the business side, and the line gets eliminated, if you will. That's probably the breaking point. But it changes in every relationship. Sometimes you get there right away. Sometimes it takes a really long time to get there.
And I'm hearing it's more of a organic evolution. It's not, you're not planning it. You're not, it's not intentional. I hear you mentioned the word trust a lot.
Yeah.
So trust is a big factor into, developing that relationship. And also you said, starting to share more personal things, and that brings you closer. And then it's just, the relationship evolves.
Yeah. And I like the idea. Like I talk to my therapist about this sometimes, about levels of transparency. And I always want to be transparent and open,
Mm.
and genuine and lay everything out. But at the same point, you don't have to tell everyone the depths of everything. But you, over time, you do start sharing more and more of that. So there's also
Mhm.
a level of it. Like on the surface, I might not tell people, hey, I'm divorced, right? But then eventually I'll be comfortable and we'll talk about things, and I'll talk about the divorce in more of a factual way. And
Yeah.
then it kind of, over time, maybe I'll go further and it'll get a little bit more emotional and I'll share more details. But you kind of, it's like drip, 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 drip. You give a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more over time. So to your point about having a plan, I don't think there's, I personally don't have to have a plan in the sense of, okay, in 1 month I need to do this with this person, and a month later. But
Hmm.
I do think holistically, in general, hey, I want to keep in touch with this person. If I have an opportunity to travel and visit them in person, I'd love to do that. I know their birthday is here. I know we've got some other inflection points in their life or my life that I want to reach out to. So I have those things kind of in mind with friends. So that could be construed as a plan, but it's not it's not like a Microsoft project plan that I'm like, okay, I got or a CRM system that I'm like, Stephanos and I, oh, we got to call. Even though you and I are really good about setting up the next,
Planning.
we don't really plan it too much, but maybe that's you.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to have a little bit more of a plan.
Maybe that's why I'm asking that question.
Yeah, there you go.
We teach what we need to learn most. That's how this whole this channel started.
There you
So
go. That's so funny.
and and the whole thing, because I do a lot of work in conferences with like 200-300 people in the room, and we're always exploring what we're talking about today, levels of connection. And I take them through some exercises where they do like 5 separate connections in a span of like 30-45 minutes. And the
Right.
first connection is just, hi, this is my name, etc. And the last connection, you have to find out each other's superpower. So
Right.
you need to, you need to be able to share a little bit of more, of just your name by the last connection. And it's really interesting the journey that they go through, and how they loosen up by the last connection, where they
Right.
have to share a little bit more than just the sort of superficial, my name is this, I'm from here, etc. And then fast forward those connections to a few months or a few years later, many people from that like 2, 3, 5 minute connection, they create businesses together, they create friendships together, they long lasting relationships. Um and look at us, we met at a course, and we're talking about business, we're friends, we're evolving this relationship into whatever we want to evolve it into.
Exactly.
um have you had a blooper over the years with connecting?
Oh, certainly. Like I mean, going all the way back to when you're a kid, right? And there's like, oh my God, I want to be friends with that person, and they clearly don't want to be friends with you, and oh wow, I don't even know it. But there's relationships. Getting back to the intentional ones, there's just
Hmm.
sometimes you don't click with people. Like one of the many things that both of us do is one-on-one coaching, and even through that lens, I'll find that what I share might not resonate with someone, and I don't connect with them as well as I could. And I want to find someone else at ThinkShift, as an example, that might have a better connection with them. So I try to tune into it. I wouldn't say there's any massive bloopers in my life, but definitely there's a lot of failed connections.
Yeah.
But in most parts, I feel like they've been fairly agreeable. Like, hey, it's just, we're not going to connect, and that's okay. Like, you can't. going to connect with everyone. And it just, what the good part about that is it kind of focuses you more on the depth of connections as opposed to breadth of connections. And I think even just in my own world, I've evolved where I think I was more focused on, I want to be friends with everyone. And now I think I've kind of dialed it back into, I want to go deeper with folks. And
what made that change?
honestly, going back to me being transparent, it was the divorce. Like I realized that there were some people that, really helped me through that. And I just didn't need to be in touch with many people. It's not that I don't stay connected. A lot of people in my personal circle are always grateful, like friends that I know from high school, from decades and decades ago, and longtime work colleagues. They always appreciate that I reach out to them and stay in touch, that I'm typically the relationship activator that I am. But
Yeah.
I just have found that it's, as I've gotten to be more vulnerable and transparent just about everything, I've gone deeper with probably 10, 15 much closer friends than I ever had gone before. So it's just, and maybe it's an age thing, maybe it's just experience, maybe it's, where we are in our lives now as opposed to, when I was in my 20s and 30s kind of thing. So it's that, like everything, that's evolved as well.
Well, talking about our 20s and 30s, and you obviously talk about this in your book as well, but what tips would you give your 20-year-old self and your sons for that matter
Yeah, that's,
around connecting?
yeah, no, that's, what I would say is there's a book, that I read. I'd gone through a pretty serious medical condition, and literally doctors are saying I might not survive. And I read this book called Chasing Daylight, and it was about this gentleman. He was an executive that had terminal cancer, and it was like he was a multimillionaire, and the doctors are literally like, you could spend as much money as you want, and you will not solve this. And so he came up with this idea of the model, and I won't get into the details of the model, but the basic idea is kind of this, if you've seen kind of the bullseye concept, right? There's like the concentric circle here, and then a bigger one and a bigger one and a bigger one and a bigger one, right? And what he did was, in his case, he started on the outside and like, hey, here's people that I've touched, and I might send them a letter and say, thanks for touching my life, I appreciate it. I'm going to spend all my time with my friends and family before I die. Thanks. And then as he kind of got closer, he did something more and more personal every time. And so what I learned from that is, and I'll say it, I don't literally do it, but I kind of have a sense of priorities in my head. Like here's the circle of, 6, 8, 10 friends that I think are lifetime friends. And then here's kind of that next circle that are super close and know me well, but they're not going to be at my bedside when it's my time, kind of thing. And so I would just tend to advise someone in their young years is to, not necessarily start prioritizing who their friends are, but to look and say, who is it? Literally, you're 20 now. Like when you're 80, 90 and you're at the tail end, who's the person that you want to be still talking to and connecting with? And think about that lens in the arc of our lives. And that's hard to do when you're in your 20s. But, give it a little thought. Like, are these people that you want to invest the next decades of your life in nurturing and fostering those relationships?
And it has to do with, somebody's values, right?
Yeah, for sure.
What has helped you, like in meeting new people? Because we talked a little bit about this earlier, and on the personal and professional side, because we obviously have, directly to do with people doing one-to-one and group coaching and consulting and advising. So you have to have some sort of chemistry with people as well, and that's why we also have chemistry sessions before we take on clients,
Right.
and see how what the chemistry is like there, and if they're willing and able to open up into such a relationship of a coaching, engagement coaching relationship that needs to be open and transparent, as you said earlier.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was just going to say, I think, when you're talking about the chemistry, what I find, some people, and this is oversimplifying the idea of, introversion and extroversion, but some people are a little more reluctant to share, early on, and other people are an open book and want to share. I tend to lean more into the open book, and I'll start a relationship by being super vulnerable and open in who I am. Effectively, if you go back to your chemistry, I'm like, here's my formula, right? And I like share the formula. And if you don't like the formula, that's okay. I'll still be nice. I'll gauge, like treat each other with kindness, but we might not be best friends in the next 2 decades. But it doesn't mean you can't have a different level of relationship. I mean, that's even what the title of this is called, levels of connection, right?
Exactly.
There's some levels that just might be purely transactional that, feel like, hey, I see the same person at the coffee shop every week, and, we're very kind. We talk to each other. She knows I have dogs. I know that she's married, whatever. And that's about it, right? And then there's other levels that you keep going up and up and up. And so I like that idea of levels. I look at it through concentric circles, but it's the same effective way that you're doing it. So
yeah.
So it's just okay. So as long as you're open and transparent, you jointly get to decide, hey, are we both in this together? Because as they say, it takes two to tango in a relationship.
Oh yeah. And I know that you've had a couple of careers, and you're obviously very successful in the corporate world as well. Before going into more consulting and coaching and leadership, what role did the connections that you had and creating new connection played in the transitioning from one career to the next?
Well, instead of answering the career side, I'll actually share a story that I'm actually talking about in my next book that I'm currently writing. But it was a story. It was basically, it was when my ex-wife now and I were planning to leave Chicago and move to Seattle. And, she had a job already at University of Washington out here, but the impetus was on me because I was the financial one. And so I had to find a job, and I was looking for jobs and trying to figure it out, and ended up going to this conference, and it was like 3 days of trying to connect and kind of job searching more than anything. And I just happened to sit down at lunch, and the gentleman next to me started asking me questions about what I did. And I started to explain it, and I was super passionate. I was super helpful for him, and I wasn't even thinking about it. And he couldn't hire me, but I was like, okay, I'll help this guy. It's nice. It's a conference, da 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 da. And after lunch, this other guy that was sitting across the table from me comes up to me, and he's like, hey, that was a great explanation. Here's what I do, da da da. By the way, and it was a Canadian based company in Toronto, but they needed someone on the West Coast in the United States. They had not hired anyone in the US. And they're like, I need someone on the West Coast. And I'm like, I need a job in Seattle.
Wow.
And it was like, wow. Like how, like, in fact, the name of that story is called Serendipity because it was serendipitous. But at the end of the day, it was a connection. I'd made a connection with the gentleman next to me in a genuine, transparent, open way. And a third party, observed how I operated and said, that's how I'd love you to make connections on behalf of us. So that was not a career, that was actually a job transition, but it's been the same thing. Like even my career transitions, it's been someone that I've known in a previous life that pulled me into a different part of my career. Both when I moved from pure technology into consulting, it was a colleague that we had worked together in technology that pulled me into consulting. And then it was another colleague that we had worked together in consulting that pulled me into THINKQSHIFT. In fact, Vips, the founder of THINKQSHIFT, is the one that, I literally called him as a friend to say, hey, I'm ready to do something different. And he's like, you need to come here. And I'm like, awesome. So yeah, it was the connections that, whether it's job transitions or career transitions, in almost every case for me, it was connections and relationships that made that happen.
And I'm hearing recurring theme, honesty, transparency, genuine and authentic connecting. I mean, you were speaking to one person, and another person appreciated the approach that you took, and that worked out in a way that you didn't anticipate. And I'm hearing also, it's not the intentional what's in it for me. It's you're connecting because you want to connect and you want to engage with that other person. It's not you're going after it because you want to get. And you also mentioned some, win-win a lot of times. So I asked you before about a model or a process, and my brain is focusing on how your way of it's not an official process, but all these are the values and the characteristics that are driving the way that you're connecting with people, which is amazing.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I don't look at it as a transactional way. And like in a weird
Yeah.
way, I will say there always is a what's in it for me. Because for me, just the fun I have in a conversation, meeting someone new, exploring, discussing, even if we never talk again, to me that's just fun. Connecting with
Yeah.
people is fun. So what's in it for me? That was fun. I learned a couple things. It was great. So I think you can almost, for some people that like to gamify things, you can almost gamify
Mm.
any connection that you make, and do it. What's in it for me? But along the way, if I'm finding joy and passion and excitement in a conversation, I, for the most part, it's infectious, and that other person typically feels it as well. Unless they're just in a really crabby mood and don't want to talk.
And what I'm hearing is it's part of your life. It's a habit. It's a habit that you love.
Yeah.
It's it sounds like a hobby, like something that you really love doing. Which it's the way that you operate. It's part of you.
Yeah, it's the way I want to show up in the world. Like just connect with people. And I like we at ThinkShift we work a lot on the cognitive side as well, and
Mhm.
try to help people literally rewire their thinking and their behaviors. And as we get into depth about it, as it relates in particular to relationships and connections and whatnot, um, there's I guess a scale, if you will. And the story I tell people, and everyone's on some part of the scale, but the way I
Mm.
always talk about the scale that we use when we talk to our coachees is that if you go into a party of 30 people, if you're 100% empathizer slash introvert, however you want to define that, you're going to find one person in that party and you're going to go to the corner and only talk to that one person the whole time. And then on the other side, if you're 100% sympathizer and you want to socialize and connect and be extroverted, you kind of want to talk to all 30 people, and you might have deeper conversations, but you want to connect with everyone. And so I use that as a tool to measure, like, go literally find yourself, go to that party of 30 people, what do you do, how many people do you connect with? And that gives me a measurement in my own head of what type of approach they like to take. Because
Mm.
even we're talking about connections, everyone has a different level of depth that they want to connect, right? Some want to
Yes.
connect and just talk about work. Some want to connect and only talk about personal. Some want to connect with a bunch of people and be in a group and share a bunch of stories. Like everyone has a different approach. So that's part of, when I'm working with someone one on one and even a leadership team, you want to try to ascertain where people are, because you always
Mm.
want to meet people where they are and help them, through that lens, because it's easier to give them guidance and suggestions and help along the way.
So there's so many different personalities and personality traits and preferences, as you mentioned. If there would be, is there a way, if you had to describe a habit that you would suggest people to adopt or try to create around connecting, what would that be? How would you describe that?
The habit, that's a good question. Um, I'm not really sure what the habit would be per se. What I would say is, there's there's a story that I'm actually writing in the next book again, and it's about compromise. And you're trying
Mhm.
to give concessions to each other and reach kind of this agreement. And one of the bullet points that I draw out is that no compromise is worse than even just a tiny bit of compromise. And if I keep that kind of framework, if I look at it, like, not connecting at all to me is
Mm.
always the worst case scenario. I'd rather connect with someone and let them tell me, never talk to me again.
Mm.
And that's okay, because I actually took the step to make the connection. I feel that's better than not doing it at all. Because on the other hand, I could not do it at all and not meet Mark, who ends up being my best friend forever in Seattle. So I say the habit, or the, like, when we talk about when we're coaching people at ThinkShift and working with them, there's obviously the idea of forming a habit, but then there's always a trigger point that causes you to kind of do the habit. So when we talk about rewiring, what we talk about is identifying the trigger point and helping figure out someone how to rewire a different habit. So to me, I don't even think about the habit. I think about the trigger point. And so to me, the trigger point is, like if you don't do it, you lose, in my opinion. So then get over that first hump. That's the trigger, and then see where it goes. And maybe it goes negatively. Like my first boss at IBM said, if you ask a question, if you ask this, will you close the deal kind of question, he's like, they're not going to get up and throw a chair at you. They're not going to physically hurt you. They're just going to say no. Like, okay, I got it. So we might as well ask the question. So to me, I always look at it that way. So I would say the habit that people should establish is, hey, if I see someone, I should connect with them, period. Whatever way that is. And be willing to deal with whatever the consequences or fallout is if it's negative. For me, I always take the optimistic view that it'll be positive. But, there are times, like you said, bloopers or negative connections. It'll happen. But again, anything is better than no connection at all.
So that ties into the next to last question, is what would you encourage people to do immediately, even today, around connecting?
Yeah, just find someone to connect with. Like literally, I mean, and depending on your level of comfort is, my typical advice is, who is it that you haven't talked to recently that you'd love to reach out to? Right. And think through that lens, like, I haven't heard from this person or talked to this person. I just want to share an update or hear from them and know what's going on. And, look through all facets of your life. Like if you want to take the next step, honestly, it's like, think about current work colleagues, former work colleagues, people you went to high school with, people you went to college with, people, that you lived in other neighborhoods with, whatever that the lens is. For me, I've got 2 sons. So here's the other dads and moms that, had kids. So you can also kind of, if you want to grow the muscle, then it's like, okay, Monday, I'm going to connect with someone I lived with in that neighborhood. Tuesday, it's someone I used to work with. Wednesday, da-da-da. So you can start to give, a theme to it.
Sounds like a process, buddy. That sounds
it is. I don't use it because I'm kind of like, I'm nonstop. But for people that need a process, you could break it down that way and just kind of sense. Like one of my trigger points, funny that you talk about processes, are they on my Christmas card list? Am I going to send them a Christmas card, or are they sending me a Christmas card? Like that's one kind of trigger to me. Like, oh yeah, we're Christmas card buddies, or I talk to them 30 times a year. I don't really need the Christmas card, but it's nice to get the picture.
David, it's always a pleasure to interact with you and speak with you. I really appreciate you as a person, as a professional, as a friend. And what I got from, our interaction is there's so much value. And I really appreciate the way that you express for yourself and, honesty, transparency, and the complete openness in the way that you express yourself. And I don't know how somebody cannot connect with you, to be honest. So thank you very much for being, the episode 1 of Levels of Connection. Awesome. I really appreciate it.
Love it.
What was useful for you today? What did you get out of today?
I love how you and I are fostering our connection and making it even bigger, stronger, faster. That's just fun to let you and I keep growing our relationship. And honestly, I hope this is helpful to your listeners and, they can take a nugget. Like I always look at whether it's our one-on-one coaching that you and I both do or engagements, or even if people are reading my book, like there's literally 110 lessons learned in my book. But if someone just gets one aha moment, I look at it as a win. So my hope is through this discussion that we've had, your listeners can walk away and say, hey, there's a good aha moment. And I hope they found that in what we did. So thanks for having me.
I'm sure there's more than one.
As long as there's one, that's good.
And you should come back with your second book, which hopefully is going to be out soon. And also, I want to invite you to Cyprus. The next conversation of Levels of Connection, we'll do a recording on the beach in Cyprus. So
be careful when you do that. It means I'm gonna like I've got my phone.
I'm not just saying that. You should
Hold
come
on.
over.
I know where the hit is. We're coming. Got it. I'm gonna start doing it. So we're on our way.
You're always welcome.
All right.
David, thank you very much. We'll see you soon.
All right. Love seeing you, man. We'll talk. Take care.
Good to see you. Bye-bye. Bye. Thank you for watching and enjoying today's episode with David Watson. You can subscribe and comment below. I'll make sure to read and reply to all comments. Thank you for your continuous support and interest in levels of connection. See you on the next episode.